Hello, everybody. Welcome, visitors, to the library. I did the same thing again. My eyes were closed, and I opened them from my meditations on the dot. That is not bragging, low-key or high-key. That is pure luck. One day, Valetta's going to have to yell down the stairs at me, I'm sure, to get on with the stream. And, yeah, that day will happen. That day will happen sooner or later. It will occur. You might notice, again, chat has changed. Chat has changed. It is now, I mean, wait a minute, was this? Yeah, no, it has changed because the background, I fixed sort of the background. You know, last time, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was a block, right? I got rid of the block setting in the CSS. I am totally becoming a pro, or as they used to say back in my day, a script kiddie when it comes to CSS. Certainly, I am no expert. But it seems like, so we kind of trimmed that up, and that gold background, as transparent as it is, should help give, so it trims it all up to be just around the words and the letters, which means it'll get out of the way out of a lot of other things, especially I imagine when we are playing the games. The games are being played, and we will see more of the stuff that is behind it. More parts are more transparent. I'm gonna spray my voice. Hang on. That is the sound, if you heard it, of a very bad tasting throat protection spray. This is called, no joke, what is it? Singer's Soothing Throat Spray Professional Strength. It is called something more poorly worded online. What is it, like Singer's Throat Protection or something? And it is not a normal throat spray. I think I probably yammered on about this a little bit. A lot of throat sprays. The first one I bought was a moisturizer. Right? Some people have dry mouth and they want to moisturize said mouth for the day or whatnot. Depending on where you live, that can be very valuable. There are a lot of dry climates around the world, and they get that spray and it works for them. But this one is about protecting your throat and your vocal cords from losing moisture, from becoming dried out as you talk or perform. Singers perform on stage with singing voices and stuff before peoples who wish to listen. And they go through very long concerts, and that can very much dry your voice out. When you talk a lot, your voice gets dry and scratchy, and if you do it too much, you can damage your throat. So this spray helps prevent some of that, and it's what I've been using for my reading streams especially, but I also put it on for gaming streams. This helps me, like my throat still gets a little dry by the end of the stream, but what it means is that my throat is not hurting the following day. So that happened a few times early on when I did reading streams. I would read for, well, back then it was only 1 and 2 and 3 hours before we kind of eased into it. But my throat would be dry at the end of the night, even though I'd been hydrating and drinking the waters. And the following day, it would still be a little achy. The day after was fine, so it recovered in a day, but that recovery is no longer necessary. That's probably a mixture of, I have done a few streams now, I'm able to talk for 3 or 4 hours, as well as the spray kind of helping out. This is my assumption from all the things that I have done. That has been fine. Work today was a ton of fun. Anyone who is in some sort of emergency response position, yeah, it was crazy fun. Yeah, it was. If you've been in, like, you know, a firefighting force, a police force, if you worked at a nuclear plant, and indeed in IT, you might be familiar with something called, hopefully you are, called incident response. And 1 second, my headset's dying. incident response. There is a group of people who organized and developed it. I think they're called BlackRock. And the timing. Oh yeah, the timing. Good old time. It's like my headset almost dies as a tradition when I'm in a meeting with my boss. It's great. It amuses us both. But this incident training formalizes how groups of people respond to emergency incidences, and it gives you training on how to communicate and organize yourselves, who does what, and it sort of organizes your subject matter experts, or like the people who know best how certain things work. Those are experts in their subject. So perhaps you are really good with servers from virtual environments. You would be a subject matter expert on virtual servers, perhaps. There is an incident commander. This is the person in charge of what's going to happen and collecting information and making choices. It's a very cool role. I quite enjoy being an incident commander. It gives me the power, but not really. It also gives you the responsibility. We have a scribe, of course, who notes down what happens and when. We have a liaison officer who is in charge of taking information from everyone collectively is put in a communication channel called the bridge. Right? Think like, bridge of the Starship Enterprise or real ships or something. Whatever floats your fancy. And what is this? Okay, my headset's being all creaky. It's probably the earmuffs. Hope they're coming tomorrow. Yeah, it did say the 11th last time I looked at it. Fingers crossed. And there's an LQ, and I forget what they did. Maybe I'm mixing that up or something. Anyways, all these people together, they form this group, and you have a communication protocol too. You don't just have a chit chat on the bridge. You're supposed to you have call signs, and you announce who you are, who you're speaking to, then deliver your message. And there are things called a CAN report, which is a very simple summary of what's happening, what actions you've taken, what expectations you have, so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into too much more detail. I've gone into far too much detail already. I'm going to put people to sleep before I start reading. It's not my intention. We had one of those this morning. That was great. I had to be scribe. I just like being scribe. But you know what? It has to be done. And it's just, you got to do the job. And it's fine. It's not a big deal. But, and then after that, we had reports of a DOS attack, so I had to deal with that too. That's great. We have good tools for that now, which by the end of the day, I'm starting to think it was actually a false positive. So I have blocked some traffic that was legitimate. Oh well, figure it out tomorrow. NordVPN looking bad, but probably isn't. Yeah. Good times. That was my day. Thank you for tuning in to hear about some strange person's day that you had no interest in. That's why we stream, to torture one another. The last time we read Frankenstein, what was it? I was getting annoyed with the character Victor Frankenstein. More and more, this character. Like we see this story through his lens. It's like a first-person narrative, right? So we see this world, this story unfold through the eyes of Victor Frankenstein, and I have become convinced he is the most unreliable witness in the world. I do not, for an instant, believe that every time he speaks to his brother, he starts the sentence with "dearest brother," or when his father speaks to him, he says "dearest son," or "dearest Victor," and I just, whenever they talk about Elizabeth, it's like radiance shines from behind her, no matter what. And as tragic as the death of the little boy William, I think it was like 5, as tragic and horrible as that is, it's going to affect the people who have lived with him for the last 6 years far more than it will affect Victor, Right? Victor has been gone for so long and has just now returned. He has never even, well, that means he hasn't even met William. But he comes here thinking falsely and without evidence that his creation is at fault and uses this as an excuse to blame himself. He is the real reason the poor boy is lost to us. And then they face the false accusation of Justine, someone he does know, someone who has been dear to the family, but is technically sort of adopted into the family. You see, you understand. And through some extremely circumstantial and unconvincing evidence, they find her guilty. And instead of stepping forward with his theory, as unsubstantiated as it may be, it's as strong as the evidence against Justine, he rationalizes not saying anything. Oh, they would consider me a madman. Anyways, they wouldn't believe me. Anyways, so I may as well say nothing. How convenient for Victor Frankenstein. Justine was executed the following day. Oh, her blood is upon the creature's hands now, certainly not mine own. He does this a few times, this justification. He watches as events unravel around him. He says nothing because he fears, in his own opinion, that it will amount to nothing, and he might as well retain a reputation of not being mad just in case he could do something about this later. Then he goes for a wander into the natural beauty around Geneva. That's right. He started off by coming back from Ingolstadt to Geneva, his hometown, upon hearing of the terrible news of William's death by letter. And this nation, this countryside, it must be the most beautiful, heavenly, angelic nation on earth that ever did exist, from what we have described. And this horrible, dreadful depression and nasty feelings that Victor is feeling that are so more than anything anyone else has felt, because they believe they were innocent. They were innocent. They are innocent. It is merely tragedy that they deal with, but not just tragedy and condemnation, like guilt. He feels the guilt. He believes he is guilty because his monster, he believes, did the deed. Therefore, he is at fault too. He wanders into the countryside and the waterfalls and the mountains and the forests and all, the birds and the bees. Instantly, they heal him. Periodically, his depression comes back, and he is thrown from the mule he is riding up on the floor, according to its burden. He's very melodramatic, and they're such a genteel group. I despise Victor Frankenstein. He is running from his perceived responsibility, whilst at the same time committing the same crime against his monster that the justice system committed against Justine, this false accusation with no solid evidence, no real reason to be doing this. And finally, was it chapter 10 was where he finished. At the end of that, he encounters the monster in the mountains. The monster has a more civilized tongue than anyone else. Yeah, monstrous and therefore evil. That's a very simple view, right? I remember as a boy, it was a monster, therefore it is evil, and this was cartoons everywhere, right? This just made sense. Monsters were bad. All the movies were about it, right? All the movies meant monsters bad. I think King Kong was the first one to suggest, at least in my memory, I'm probably wrong, was the first one to suggest in my memory that the monster is not necessarily evil. They just have a different way of doing things, which don't coordinate well with the rest of us. Don't fit well with the rest of us. But at the end of chapter 10, Victor's monster convinces him to go to a cabin or a shack or something where there's a warm fire in order to have a conversation. One conversation. He must listen to him and proceed from there. And that's where we are going to start today. We're going to start with that conversation. Once again, through the lens of Victor Frankenstein. The real monster in this, I was going to say movie, but it's a book. The only thing moving on screen is me, and barely, which is good. Old men don't want to move too quickly. It's probably a good idea that I'm 2D instead of 3D. No expectations for like dance videos. Ugh, dance. Just break my ankles or something. No, thank you. I hit my follower mark over the last week. I have been given the affiliate email from Twitch, and I have a plan to configure this over this weekend sometime. This is awesome. This is exciting. There are whole new menus all throughout the Twitch interface that I am just itching to explore, but I dare not touch them in case I accidentally activate it early. Valana will roast me alive if she doesn't get the first Founder's Badge. So we will do that. And that will be lots of fun, or else. Also, the icons are a little different, I think. Yeah, sure. You don't have to agree that quickly. Oh yeah, there's the sub only chat, which would basically shut the whole thing down and stuff. Yeah, there are no subs. There are no. This is not even set up. You can't be a sub. I don't think. That option is not available, right? Just go check Twitch. Yeah, no, you can't do it. You cannot call in to join your own stream. Oh, that's where like the whole stream together. There's a stream together button that I'm seeing now. This is. Everyone should set up like the recording channel and go live once in a while just to see what cool, neat things you can play around with. Very cool stuff, in my opinion. I love to play with things. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. If you're watching the VOD, you may see more things than what I am talking about after this weekend, certainly. Awesome. Why don't we get started with the show, with the reading of the things and the stuff? I will put. I'm gonna hide my face from OBS because I keep staring at my face, which is a very handsome face, and we love the beard. The beard is amazing, but it means I'm constantly staring after that, which makes me look, I suspect, incredibly suspicious. But this time, we're going to remember to flip to the reading scene. There we go. I can read the actual book now. Imagine that. We see that. See our chat looks the same. One thing I super like about this chat from Sound Alerts. This one is from Sound Alerts. I might try another one. That nutty streamer he built in StreamerBot. He has one, which is like the multi-chat thing. I'm not planning on multi-streaming right now. It is the future thing that it is a consideration, but not right now. Still kind of tons of things to do in the way first. But it also has a possibility that I may experiment with that too. We just start with that. But in the meantime, yeah, I like how it doesn't refresh when you flip scenes, right? I think with like stream elements, when I flip to the reading stream, you would start anew. The chat history would be gone. In fact, I think I complained about that. So yeah, it's nice to keep that. So we'll see how this works with the gaming streams too. All right. Anyhow, let us begin. Chapter marker. Chapter 11. It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct. I think this is the monster talking. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt all the same time. Sorry, at the same time. It was indeed a long time before I learned to distinguish between the operations of my various senses. By degrees, I remember a strong light pressed upon my nerves, so that I was obliged to shut my eyes. Darkness then overcame me and troubled me, but I had felt this when, by opening my eyes, as I now suppose, the light poured in upon me again. I walked, and I believe descended, but I presently found a great alteration in my sensations. Before, dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me, impervious to my touch or sight, but I now found that I could wander on at liberty, with no obstacles which I could not either surmount or avoid. The light became more and more oppressive to me, and the heat wearying me as I walked. I sought a place where I could receive shade. This was the forest near Ingolstadt. God, you wandered a long way. And here I lay by the side of a brook, resting from my fatigue, until I felt tormented by hunger and thirst. This roused me from my nearly dormant state, and I ate some berries which I found hanging on the trees, or lying on the ground. I slaked my thirst at the brook, and then lying down was overcome by sleep. This guy traveled, well, like, how long does it, like they take a coach, right? They take they get a ride going from Ingolstadt to Geneva. This guy, it's like it just overnighted it by foot. That's impressive. It was dark when I awoke. I felt cold also, and half frightened, as it were indistinctively, finding myself so desolate. Before I had quitted your apartment, on a sensation of cold, I had covered myself with some clothes, but these were insufficient to secure me from the dews of night. I was a poor, helpless, miserable wretch. I knew and could distinguish nothing, but feeling pain invade me on all sides, I sat down and wept. Soon a gentle light stole over the heavens and gave me a sensation of pleasure. I started up and beheld a radiant form rise from among the trees. I gazed with a kind of wonder. It moved slowly, but it enlightened my path, and I again went out in search of berries. I was still cold, when under one of the trees I found a huge cloak, with which I covered myself, and sat down upon the ground. No distinct ideas occupied my mind. All was confused. I felt light and hunger and thirst and darkness. Innumerable sounds rung in my ears, and on all sides various scents saluted me. The only object that I could distinguish was the bright moon, and I fixed my eyes on that with pleasure. The moon. Several changes of day and night passed, and the orb of night had greatly lessened, when I began to distinguish my sensations from each other. I gradually saw plainly the clear stream that supplied me with drink, and the trees that shaded me with their foliage. I was delighted when I first discovered that a pleasant sound, which often saluted my ears, proceeded from the throats of the little winged animals who had often intercepted the light from my eyes. I began also to observe with greater accuracy the forms that surrounded me, and to perceive the boundaries of the radiant roof of light which canopied me. Sometimes I tried to imitate the pleasant songs of the birds, but was unable. Sometimes I wished to express my sensations in my own mode, but the uncouth and inarticulate sounds which broke from me frightened me into silence again. He's a baby. He's learning how to be a baby. The moon had disappeared from the night, and again, with a lessened form, showed itself, while I still remained in the forest. My sensations had, by this time, become distinct, and my mind received every day additional ideas. My eyes became accustomed to the light and to perceive objects in their right forms. I distinguished the insect from the herb, and by degrees one herb from another. I found that the sparrow uttered none but harsh notes, whilst those of the blackbird and the thrush were sweet and enticing. Apparently he learned what birds were called. One day, when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects. I examined the materials of the fire, and to my joy, found it to be composed of wood. I quickly collected some branches, but they were wet and would not burn. I was pained at this, and sat still watching the operation of the fire. The wet wood which I had placed near the heat dried, and itself became inflamed. I reflected on this, and by touching the various branches, I discovered the cause, and busied myself in collecting a great quantity of wood, that I might dry it, and have a plentiful supply of fire. When night came on, and brought sleep with it, I was in the greatest fear lest my fire should be extinguished. I covered it carefully with dry wood and leaves, and placed wet branches upon it, and then spreading my cloak, I lay on the ground and sunk into sleep. Yeah, fire hot. It was morning when I awoke, and my first care was to visit the fire. I uncovered it, and a gentle breeze quickly fanned it into a flame. I observed this also, and contrived a fan of branches, which roused the embers when they were nearly extinguished. When night came again, I found with pleasure that the fire gave light as well as heat, and that the discovery of this element was useful to me in my food, for I found some of the offals that the travelers had left had been roasted, and tasted much more savory than the berries I gathered from the trees. I tried, therefore, to dress my food in the same manner. Placing it on the live embers, I found the berries were spoiled by this operation, and the nuts and roots much improved. Food, however, became scarce, and I often spent the whole day searching in vain for a few acorns to assuage the pangs of hunger. When I found this, I resolved to quit the place that I had hitherto inhabited, to seek for one where the few wants I experienced would be more easily satisfied. In this immigration, I exceedingly lamented the loss of the fire which I had obtained through accident, and knew not how to reproduce it. I gave several hours to the serious consideration of this difficulty, but I was obliged to relinquish all attempt to supply it, and wrapping myself up in my cloak, I struck across the wood towards the setting sun. I passed 3 days in these rambles, and at length discovered the open country. A great fall of snow had taken place the night before, and the fields were of one uniform white. The appearance was disconsolate, and I found my feet chilled by the cold, damp substance that covered the ground. It was about 7 in the morning, and I longed to obtain food and shelter. At length I perceived a small hut on a rising ground which had doubtless been built for the convenience of some shepherd. This was a new sight to me, and I examined the structure with great curiosity. Finding the door opened, I entered. An old man sat in it near a fire, over which he was preparing his breakfast. He turned on hearing a noise, and, perceiving me, shrieked loudly, and, quitting the hut, ran across the fields with a speed of which his debilitated form hardly appeared capable. His appearance different from any I had ever before seen, and his flight somewhat surprised me. But I was enchanted by the appearance of the hut. Yeah, poor old man is right. But I was enchanted by the appearance of the hut. Here the snow and rain could not penetrate. The ground was dry, and it was presented to me then as exquisite and define a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire. I greedily devoured the remains of the shepherd's breakfast, which consisted of bread, cheese, milk, and wine. The latter, however, I did not like. Then, overcome by fatigue, I lay down among some straw and fell asleep. It was noon when I awoke, and allured by the warmth of the sun, which shone brightly on the white ground, I determined to recommence my travels, and depositing the remains of the peasant's breakfast in a wallet I found, I proceeded across the fields for several hours, until at sunset I arrived at a village. How miraculous did this appear! The huts, the neater cottages, the stately houses engaged my admiration by turns. The vegetables in the gardens, the milk and cheese that I saw placed at the windows of some of the cottages allured my appetite. One of the best of these I entered, but I had hardly placed my foot within the door before the children shrieked, and one of the women fainted. The whole village was amused, and some fled, some attacked me, until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to the open country, and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel, quite bare, and making a wretched appearance after the palaces I had beheld in the village. This hovel, however, joined a cottage of a neat and pleasant appearance, but after my late dearly bought experience, I dared not enter it. My place of refuge was constructed of wood, but so low that I could with difficulty sit upright in it. No wood, however, was placed on the earth, which formed the floor. Sorry, I'm hearing Gwen in the background. Gwen, what you doing? Hey? What's the matter? It's not raining outside, is it? Can you hear Gwen? Meow. Silly kitten. I'm sorry, where was I? Here we go. This hovel, however, joined a cottage of a neat and pleasant appearance, but after my late dearly bought experience, I dared not enter it. My place of refuge was constructed of wood, but so low that I could with difficulty sit upright in it. No wood, however, was placed on the earth, which formed the floor, but it was dry, and although the wind entered it by innumerable chinks, I found it an agreeable asylum from the snow and rain. Here then I retreated, and lay down happy to have found a shelter, however miserable, from the inclemency of the season. The inclemency of the season, and still more from the barbarity of man. As soon as morning dawned, I crept from my kennel that I might view the adjacent cottage and discover if I could remain in the habitation I had found. It was situated against the back of the cottage and surrounded on the sides, which were exposed by a pigsty and a clear pool of water. One part was open, and by that I crept in, but now I covered every crevice by which I might have But now I covered every crevice by which I might be perceived with stones and wood, yet in such a manner that I might move them on occasion to pass out. All the light I enjoyed came through the sky, and that was sufficient for me. I guess he reinforces his little kennel, as he put it. Okay, it doesn't matter. All right, he's making a home. Having thus arranged my dwelling and carpeted it with clean straw, I retired, for I saw the figure of a man at a distance, and I remembered too well my treatment the night before to trust myself in his power. I had first, however, provided for my sustenance for that day by a loaf of coarse bread which I purloined, and a cup with which I could drink, more conveniently than from my hand, of the pure water which flowed by my retreat. The floor was a little raised so that it was kept perfectly dry, and by its vicinity to the chimney of the cottage was tolerably warm. Being thus provided, I resolved to reside in this hovel until something should occur which might alter my determination. It was indeed a paradise compared to the bleak forest, my former residence, the rain dropping branches and dank earth. I ate my breakfast with pleasure, and was about to remove a plank to procure myself a little water when I heard a step, and looking through a small chink, I beheld a young creature, with a pail on her head, passing before my hovel. The girl was young and of gentle demeanor, unlike what I have since found cottagers and farmhouse servants to be. Yet she was meanly dressed, a coarse blue petticoat and a linen jacket being her only garb. Her fair hair was plaited, but not adorned. She looked patient, yet sad. I lost sight of her, and in about a quarter of an hour she returned, bearing the pail, which was now partly filled with milk. As she walked along, seemingly incommoded by the burden, a young man met her, whose countenance expressed a deeper despondence. Uttering a few sounds with an air of melancholy, he took the pail from her head and bore it to the cottage himself. She followed, and then disappeared. Presently, I saw the young man again, with some tools in his hand, cross the field behind the cottage, and the girl was also busy, sometimes in the house and sometimes in the yard. On examining my dwelling, I found that one of the windows of the cottage had formerly occupied a part of it, but the panes had been filled up with wood. In one of these was a small and almost imperceptible chink, through which the eye could just penetrate. Through this crevice a small room was visible, whitewashed and clean, but very bare of furniture. In one corner, near a small fire, sat an old man, leaning his head on his hands in a disconsolate attitude. The young girl was occupied in arranging the cottage, but presently she took something out of a drawer, which employed her hands, and she sat down beside the old man, who, taking up an instrument, began to play, and to produce sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush or the nightingale. It was a lovely sight, even to me, poor wretch, who had never beheld aught beautiful before. The silver hair and the benevolent countenance of the aged cottager won my reverence, while the gentle manners of the girl enticed my love. He played a sweet, mournful air, which I perceived drew tears from the eyes of his amiable companion, of which the old man took no notice, until she sobbed audibly. He then, pronounced a few sounds. I'm not sure if I should have said sick. Curly braces, and sick inside the curly braces. I think that's supposed to be a grammar thing or something. Let me say that again. Until she sobbed audibly. He then pronounced a few sounds, and the fair creature, leaving her work, knelt at his feet. He raised her, and smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food, and I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions. Oh, right. A mistake thus copied over on purpose. Yeah, it was probably supposed to be THEN rather than THAN. Okay, fair enough. So our monster is learning emotion. He's a fast learner, he is. Soon after this young man returned, bearing on his shoulders a load of wood. The girl met him at the door, helped to relieve him of his burden, and, taking some of the fuel into the cottage, placed it on the fire. Then she and the youth went apart to a nook of the cottage, and he showed her a large loaf and a piece of cheese. She seemed pleased, and went into the garden for some roots and plants, which she placed in water, and then upon the fire. She afterwards continued her work, whilst the young man went into the garden and appeared busily employed in digging and pulling up roots. After he had been employed thus about an hour, the young woman joined him, and they entered the cottage together. The old man had, in the meantime, been pensive, but on the appearance of his young companions, he assumed a more cheerful air, and they sat down to eat. The meal was quickly dispatched. The young woman was again occupied in arranging the cottage. The old man walked before the cottage in the sun for a few minutes, leaning on the arm of the youth. Nothing could exceed in beauty the contrast between these two excellent creatures. One was old, with silver hairs and a countenance beaming with benevolence and love. The younger was slight and graceful in his figure, and his features were molded with the finest symmetry, yet his eyes and attitude expressed the utmost sadness and despondence. The old man returned to the cottage, and the youth, with tools different from those he had used in the morning, directed his steps across the fields. Night quickly shut in, but to my extreme wonder, I found that the cottagers had a means of prolonging light by the use of tapers, and was delighted to find that the setting of the sun did not put an end to the pleasure I experienced in watching my human neighbors. In the evening, the young girl and her companion were employed in various occupations which I did not understand, and the old man again took up the instrument which produced the divine sounds that had enchanted me in the morning. So soon as he had finished, the youth began, not to play, but to utter sounds that were monotonous and neither resembling the harmony of the old man's instrument nor the songs of the birds. I since found that he read aloud, but at the time I knew nothing of the science of words or letters. The family, after having been thus occupied for a short time, extinguished their lights and retired, as I conjectured, to rest. Thus ends chapter 11. Frankenstein's monster sure can't talk. Right. Chapter 12. For some reason, this is now chapter 12 and not just more of chapter 11. Yes, he is very focused on others, his learning experience, his very much a lot of like what we know about how babies grow and learn and how their brains develop. He's doing sort of a very fast forwarded summary version of that, right? Like I didn't understand shapes and I couldn't separate things, and then I think there's probably a little bit of object permanence being mixed in there, depending on how you read it, I suppose. And then learning about his basic needs for survival, and then towards the end of that chapter, his emotional needs, and watching the family unit cooperate together, not in violence to throw him out of places, but unaware of him living together, cooperating together, preparing meals, managing houses, and doing chores and such. It's great. I like it. Anyhow, on with chapter 12. I lay on my straw, but I could not sleep. I thought of the occurrences of the day. What chiefly struck me was the gentle manners of these people, and I longed to join them, but dared not. I remembered too well the treatment I had suffered the night before from the barbarous villagers, and resolved, whatever course of conduct I might hereafter think it right to pursue, that for the present I would remain quietly in my hovel, watching and endeavoring to discover the motives which influenced their actions. The cottagers arose the next morning before the sun. The young woman arranged the cottage and prepared the food, and the youth departed after the first meal. This day was passed in the same routine as that which preceded it. The young man was constantly employed out of doors, and the girl in various labors or various laborious occupations within. The old man, whom I soon perceived to be blind, employed his leisure hours on his instrument or in contemplation. Nothing could exceed the love and respect which the younger cottagers exhibited towards their venerable companion. They performed towards him every little office of affection and duty with gentleness, and he rewarded them by his benevolent smiles. They were not entirely happy. The young man and his companion often went apart and appeared to weep. I saw no cause for their unhappiness, but I was deeply affected by it. If such lovely creatures were miserable, it was less strange that I, an imperfect and solitary being, should be wretched. Yet why were these gentle being unhappy? Gentle beings unhappy, perhaps? They possessed a delightful house, for such it was in my eyes, and every luxury. They had a fire to warm them when chill, and delicious viands when hungry. They were dressed in excellent clothes, and still more, they enjoyed one another's company and speech, interchanging each day looks of affection and kindness. What did their tears imply? Did they really express pain? I was at first unable to solve these questions, but perpetual attention and time explained to me many appearances which were at first enigmatic. It is interesting how we each perceive what others have or do not have, and how that reflects upon us. The creature here, the monster, has so little. He has just what he needs to survive. Looks at the people around him who have anything more than that, and can't help but be awed by the wealth of their experiences and existence. And I'm reminded of like, you can sort of extrapolate that in today's world. We look at people who are in an economic class above us, the very, very wealthy, for example, is an easy low-hanging fruit example, and we think, oh my goodness, they have all the things. They have everything. How could they want for anything else? And then perhaps we look down the economic scale and we look at people who are very unfortunate. Perhaps they don't have a home. Perhaps they are struggling with some sort of challenge in their life, whatever it is, and they have less than we do. And you know, hopefully you have a little bit of sympathy, and if you try, you can have some empathy, and you think, wow, they don't have enough. What if we shifted our mindset, sort of like, and just extrapolated on that? Does then the very wealthy person look down at us in our lower economic level class and think the same thing as we do to those who perhaps do not have a home? And by extension, do those people, and I kind of think this is true, if you are very wealthy, I think you believe that you have just enough, right? There's a lot of context in there. I suspect a lot of people probably believe that. I find that to be very interesting. It might explain a few of our societal issues. Where were we? Oh yes, appearances which were at first enigmatic. A considerable period elapsed before I discovered one of the causes of this uneasiness, of this amiable family. It was poverty, and they suffered that evil in every distressing degree. Their nourishment consisted entirely of the vegetables in their garden and the milk of one cow, which gave very little during the winter, when its masters could scarcely procure food to support it. They often, I believe, suffered the pangs of hunger very poignantly, especially the two younger cottagers, for several times they placed food before the old man when they reserved none for themselves. This trait of kindness moved me sensibly. I had been accustomed during the night to steal a part of their store for my own consumption, but when I found that in doing this I inflicted pain on the cottagers, I abstained, and satisfied myself with berries, nuts, and roots, which I gathered from a neighboring wood. I discovered also another means through which I was enabled to assist their labors. I found that the youth spent a great part of each day in collecting wood for the family fire during the night. I often took his tools, the use of which I quickly discovered, and brought home firing sufficient for the consumption of several days. You would make a great lumberjack. I remember the first time that I did this, the young woman, when she opened the door in the morning, appeared greatly astonished on seeing a great pile of wood on the outside. She uttered some words in a loud voice, and the youth joined her, who also expressed surprise. I observed with pleasure that he did not go to the forest that day, but spent it in repairing the cottage and cultivating the garden. By degrees, I made a discovery of still greater moment. I found that these people possessed a method of communicating their experience and feelings to one another by articulate sounds. I perceived that the words they spoke sometimes produced pleasure or pain, smiles or sadness, in the minds and countenances of the hearers. This was indeed a godlike science, and I ardently desired to become acquainted with it, but I was baffled in every attempt I made for this purpose. Their pronunciation was quick, and the words they uttered not having any apparent connection with visible objects, I was unable to discover any clue by which they could unravel the mystery of their reference. Babies learning words, yeah. Baby chopped down a mountain of wood, then learned how to speak. By great application, however, and after having remained during the space of several revolutions of the moon in my hovel, I discovered the names that were given to some of the most familiar objects of discourse. I learned and applied the words fire, milk, bread, and wood. I learned also the names of the cottagers themselves. The youth and his companion had each of them several names, but the old man had only one, which was father. I have made a discovery. So, you know how I was talking about the underscores surrounding some words? I believe they are quotes. They are double quotes, right? He is listing words like fire, milk, bread, wood, and father, right? And like normally in sort of modern writing, you might put those in double quotes. I have my fingers up doing air double quotes, so just imagine that it's behind the book. You can't see it. Sorry. Yeah, so maybe that's it. Okay, latest interruption over. Prepare for the next one. The girl was called Sister or Agatha, and the youth Felix, brother or son. I cannot describe the delight I felt when I learned the ideas appropriated to each of these sounds, and was able to pronounce them. I distinguished several other words without being able as yet to understand or apply them, such as good, dearest, unhappy. I spent the winter in this manner. The gentle manners and beauty of the cottagers greatly endeared them to me. When they were unhappy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathized in their joys. I saw few human beings beside them, and if any other happened to enter the cottage, their harsh manners and rude gait only enhanced to me the superior accomplishments of my friends. The old man, I could perceive, often endeavored to encourage his children, as sometimes I found that he called them to cast off their melancholy. He would talk in a cheerful accent, with an expression of goodness that bestowed pleasure even upon me. Agatha listened with respect, her eyes sometimes filled with tears, which she endeavored to wipe away unperceived. but I generally found that her countenance and tone were more cheerful after having listened to the exhortations of her father. It was not thus with Felix. He was always the saddest of the group, and, even to my unpracticed senses, he appeared to have suffered more deeply than his friends. But if his countenance was more sorrowful, his voice was more cheerful than that of his sister, especially when he addressed the old man. I could mention innumerable instances which, although slight, marked the dispositions of these amiable cottagers in the midst of poverty and want. Felix carried with pleasure to his sister the first little white flower that peeped out from beneath the snowy ground. Early in the morning, before she had risen, he cleared away the snow that obstructed her path to the milk-house, drew water from the well, and brought the wood from the outhouse, where, to his perpetual astonishment, he found his store always replenished by an invisible hand. In the day, I believe, he worked sometimes for a neighboring farmer, because he often went forth and did not return until dinner, yet brought no wood with him. At other times he worked in the garden, but as there was little to do in the frosty season, he read to the old man and Agatha. This reading had puzzled me extremely at first, but by degrees I discovered that he uttered many of the same sounds when he read as when he talked. I conjectured, therefore, that he found on the paper signs for speech, which he understood, and I ardently longed to comprehend these also. But how was that possible, when I did not even understand the sounds for which they stood as signs? I improved, however, sensibly in this science, but not sufficiently to follow up any kind of conversation, although I applied my whole mind to the endeavor, for I easily perceived that although I eagerly longed to discover myself to the cottagers, I ought not to make the attempt until I had first become master of their language, which knowledge might enable me to make them overlook the deformity of my figure. For with this also the contrast perpetually presented to my eyes had made me acquainted. I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions, but how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool. At first, I started back, unable to believe that it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror, and when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas, I did not entirely know the fatal effects of this miserable deformity. As the sun became warmer and the light of day longer, the snow vanished, and I beheld the bare trees and the black earth. From this time, Felix was more employed, and the heart-moving indications of impending famine disappeared. Their food, as I afterwards found, was coarse, but it was wholesome, and they procured a sufficiency of it. Several new kinds of plants sprung up in the garden, which they dressed, and these signs of comfort increased daily as the season advanced. The old man, leaning on his son, walked each day at noon, when it did not rain, as I found it was called, and the heavens poured forth its waters. This frequently took place, but a high wind quickly dried the earth, and the season became far more pleasant than it had been. My mode of life in my hovel was uniform. During the morning, I attended the motions of the cottagers, and when they were dispersed in various occupations, I slept. The remainder of the day was spent in observing my friends. When they had retired to rest, if there was any moon, or the night was starlit, I went into the woods and collected my own food and a fuel for the cottage. When I returned, as often as was necessary, I cleared their path from the snow and performed those offices that I had seen done by Felix. I afterwards found that these labors, performed by an invisible hand, greatly astonished them, and once or twice I heard them, on occasions, utter the words, "Good spirit," wonderful. But I did not then understand the significance of these terms. My thoughts now became more active, and I longed to discover the motives and feelings of these lovely creatures. I was inquisitive to know why Felix appeared so miserable and Agatha so sad. I thought, foolish wretch, that it might be in my power to restore happiness to these deserving people. When I slept or was absent, the forms of the vulnerable blind father, the gentle Agatha, and the excellent Felix flitted before me. I looked upon them as superior beings, who would be the arbiters of my future destiny. I formed in my imagination 1,000 pictures of presenting myself to them, and their reception of me. I imagined that they would be disgusted, until by my gentle demeanor and conciliating words I should first win their favor, and afterwards their love. These thoughts exhilarated me, and led me to apply with fresh ardor to the acquiring the art of language. My organs were indeed harsh but supple, and although my voice was very unlike the soft music of their tones, yet I pronounced such words as I understood with tolerable ease. It was as the ass and the lapdog, yet surely the gentle ass, whose intentions were affectionate, although his manners were rude, deserved better treatment than blows and execration. Execration, I guess. The pleasant showers and genial warmth of spring greatly altered the aspect of the earth. Men who before this change seemed to have been hid in caves dispersed themselves and were employed in various arts of cultivation. The birds sang in more cheerful notes, and the leaves began to bud forth on the trees. Happy, happy earth, fit habitation for gods, which so short a time before was bleak, damp, and unwholesome. My spirits were elevated by the enchanting appearance of nature. The past was blotted from my memory, the present was tranquil, and the future gilded by bright rays of hope and anticipations of joy. Whereas he is probably no awareness that winter is coming back again. This is the end of our chapter 12. We're zipping through them. Chapter 13. I now hastened to the more moving part of my story. I shall relate events that impressed me with the feelings which, from what I had been, have made me what I am. Spring advanced rapidly. The weather became fine, and the skies cloudless. It surprised me that what before was desert and gloomy should now bloom with the most beautiful flowers and verdure. I guess. My senses were gratified and refreshed by 1,000 scents of delight and 1,000 sights of beauty. It was on one of these days when my cottagers periodically rested from labor. The old man played on his guitar, and the children listened to him, that I observed the countenance of Felix was melancholy beyond expression. He sighed frequently, and once his father paused in his music, and I conjectured by his manner that he inquired the cause of his son's sorrow. Felix replied in a cheerful accent, and the old man was recommencing his music when someone tapped at the door. It was a lady on horseback, accompanied by a countryman as a guide. The lady was dressed in a dark suit and covered with a thick black veil. Agatha asked a question, to which the stranger only replied by pronouncing in a sweet accent the name of Felix. Her voice was musical, but unlike that of either of my friends. On hearing this word, Felix came up hastily to the lady, who, when she saw him, threw up her veil, and I beheld a countenance of angelic beauty and expression. her hair of a shining raven black and curiously braided. Her eyes were dark but gentle, although animated, her features of irregular proportion, and her complexion wondrously fair, each cheek tinged with a lovely pink. Felix seemed ravished with delight when he saw her. Every trait of sorrow vanished from his face, and it instantly expressed a degree of ecstatic joy of which I could hardly have believed it capable. His eyes sparkled as his cheek flushed with pleasure, and at that moment I thought him as beautiful as the stranger. She appeared affected by different feelings. Wiping a few tears from her lovely eyes, she held out her hand to Felix, who kissed it rapturously, and called her, as well as I could distinguish, his sweet Arabian. She did not appear to understand him, but smiled. He assisted her to dismount, and dismissing her guide, conducted her into the cottage. Some conversation took place between him and his father, and the young stranger knelt at the old man's feet, and would have kissed his hand, but he raised her and embraced her affectionately. I soon perceived that, although the stranger uttered articulate sounds and appeared to have a language of her own, she was neither understood by, nor herself understood, the cottagers. Hang on, what was that? I soon perceived that, although the stranger uttered articulate sounds and appeared to have a language of her own, she was neither understood by, nor herself understood, the cottagers. She was neither understood by, nor herself understood by the cottagers. Ah, it's a nor, not a not. All right. Mystery solved. They made many signs which I did not comprehend, but I saw that her presence diffused gladness through the cottage, dispelling their sorrow as the sun dissipates the morning mists. Felix seemed particularly happy, with smiles of delight welcomed his Arabian. Agatha, the ever-gentle Agatha, kissed the hands of the lovely stranger, and, pointing to her brother, made signs which appeared to me to mean that she had been sorrowful until she came. Some hours passed thus, while they, by their countenances, expressed joy, the cause of which I did not comprehend. Presently I found, by the frequent recurrence of some sound which the stranger repeated after them, that she was endeavoring to learn their language, and the idea instantly occurred to me that I should make use of the same instructions to the same end. The stranger learned about 20 words at the first lesson. Most of them, indeed, were those which I had before understood, but I profited by the others. It's always good to start with a little bit of what you know. As night came on, Agatha and the Arabian retired early. When they separated, Felix kissed the hand of the stranger and said, "Good night, sweet Safi." Safi. That sounds... I think I used to know someone named... No, it was Sylvia, never mind. Saf. It's like safe with an extra I. Safi. Safi. He sat up much longer, conversing with his father, and, by the frequent repetition of her name, I conjectured that their lovely guest was the subject of the conversation. Sorry, I keep having like a partial hiccup. We had a lot of Diet Coke at dinner tonight. I blame Valana. I ardently desired to understand them and bent every faculty towards that purpose, but found it utterly impossible. Yeah, it's your fault, Valana. The next morning, Felix went out to his work, and, after the usual occupations of Agatha were finished, the Arabian sat at the feet of the old man, and, taking his guitar, played some airs so entrancingly beautiful that they at once drew tears of sorrow and delight from my eyes. She sang, and her voice flowed in a rich cadence, swelling or dying away like a nightingale of the woods. When she had finished, she gave the guitar to Agatha, who at first declined it. She played a simple air, and her voice accompanied it in sweet accents, but unlike the wondrous strain of the stranger. The old man appeared enraptured, and said some words which Agatha endeavored to explain to Safie, and by which he appeared to wish to express that she bestowed on him the greatest delight by her music. The days now passed as peaceably as before, with the sole alteration that joy had taken place of sadness in the countenances of my friends. Safie was always gay and happy. She and I improved rapidly in the knowledge of language, so that in 2 months I began to comprehend most of the words uttered by my protectors. In the meanwhile, also the black ground was covered with herbage, and the green banks interspersed with innumerable flowers, sweet to the scent and the eyes. Stars of pale radiance among the moonlight woods, the sun became warmer, the nights clear and balmy, and my nocturnal rambles were an extreme pleasure to me, although they were considerably shortened by the late setting and early rising of the sun. For I never ventured abroad during daylight, fearful of meeting with the same treatment I had formerly endured in the first village which I entered. You know what, Valena? Kind of reminds me of Dritz. Yeah? Dritz or Drizzt, depending on who's saying what when. My days were spent in close attention, that I might more speedily master the language, and I may boast that I improved more rapidly than the Arabian, who understood very little and conversed in broken accents, whilst I comprehended and could imitate almost every word that was spoken. Yeah, learning about the surface world, learning how to communicate with those around him, learning to have survived in the wilds of the Underdark before that, and then being chased across the surface to the very end of the civilized world. Dritz probably went a little further than our boy here. While I improved in speech, I also learned the science of letters, as it was taught to the stranger, and this opened before me a wide field for wonder and delight. The book from which Felix instructed Safie was Volney's Ruins of Empires. I should not have understood the purport of this book had not Felix, in reading it, given the very minute explanations. He had chosen this work, he said, because the declamatory style was framed in imitation of the Eastern authors. Through this work, I obtained a cursory knowledge of history and a view of the several empires at present existing in the world. My headset is sitting very oddly on my face. Yeah, there we go. Start hurting my ears in a new direction. I am very much looking forward to my delivery tomorrow. Right, let's see. He obtained a cursory knowledge of history and a view of the several empires that currently exist in the world. It gave me an insight into the manners, governments, and religions of the different nations of the earth. I heard of the slothful Asiatics, of the stupendous genius and mental activity of the Grecians, of the wars and wonderful virtue of the early Romans, of their subsequent degenerating, of the decline of that mighty empire of chivalry, Christianity, and kings. I heard of the discovery of the American hemisphere, and wept with Safie over the hapless fate of its original inhabitants. These wonderful narrations inspired me with strange feelings. Was man, indeed, at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? He appeared at one time a mere scion of the evil principle, and at another as that can be conceived of noble and godlike. To be a great and virtuous man appeared the highest honor that can befall a sensitive being. To be a base and vicious, as many on record have been, appeared the lowest degradation, a condition more abject than that of the blind mole or harmless worm. For a long time, I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. But when I heard the details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing. Every conversation of the cottagers now opened new wonders to me. While I listened to the instructions which Felix bestowed upon the Arabian, the strange system of human society was explained to me. I heard of the division of property, of immense wealth and squalid poverty, of rank, descent, and noble blood. The words induced me to turn towards myself. I learned that the possessions most esteemed by your fellow creatures were high and unsullied descent united with riches. A man might be respected with only one of these advantages, but without either, he was considered, except in very rare instances, as a vagabond and a slave, doomed to waste his powers for the profits of the chosen few. And what was I? Of my creation and creator I was absolutely ignorant, but I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of property. I was, besides, endued with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even of the same nature as man. I was more agile than they, and could subsist upon coarser diet. I bore the extremes of heat and cold with less injury to my frame. My stature far exceeded theirs. When I looked around, I saw and heard of none like me. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth from which all men fled, and whom all men disowned? I cannot describe to you the agony that these reflections inflicted upon me. I tried to dispel them, but sorrow only increased with knowledge. Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood, nor known nor felt beyond the sensations of hunger, thirst, and heat. Of what a strange nature is knowledge. It clings to the mind. When it has once seized on it like a lichen on the rock, I wished sometimes to shake off all thought and feeling, but I learned that there was but one means to overcome the sensation of pain, and that was death, a state which I feared yet did not understand. I admired virtue and good feelings, and loved the gentle manners and amiable qualities of my cottagers, but I was shut out from intercourse with them, except through means which I obtained by stealth, when I was unseen and unknown, and which rather increased than satisfied the desire I had of becoming one among my fellows. The gentle words of Agatha and the animated smiles of the charming Arabian were not for me. The mild exhortations of the old man and the lively conversation of the loved Felix were not for me, miserable, unhappy wretch. Other lessons were impressed upon me even more deeply. I heard of the difference of sexes, of the birth and growth of children, how the father doted on the smiles of the infant, and the lively sallies of the older child, how all the life and cares of the mother were wrapped up in the precious charge, how the mind of youth expanded and gained knowledge of brother, sister, and all the various relationships which bind one human being to another in mutual bonds. But where were my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days, no mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses, or if they had, all my past life was now a blot, a blind vacancy in which I distinguished nothing. From my earliest remembrance, I had been as I then was in height and proportion. I had never yet seen a being resembling me, or who claimed any intercourse with me. What was I? The question again recurred, to be answered only with groans. I will soon explain to what these feelings tended, but allow me now to return to the cottagers, whose stories excited me in such various feelings of indignation, delight, and wonder, but which all terminated in additional love and reverence for my protectors. For I so loved in an innocent, half painful self-deceit to call them. That was chapter 13. Chapter 14. Some time elapsed before I learned the history of my friends. It was one which could not fail to impress itself deeply on my mind, unfolding as it did a number of circumstances, each interesting and wonderful to one so utterly inexperienced as I was. The name of the old man was de Lacy. He was descended from a good family in France, where he had lived for many years in affluence, respected by his superiors and beloved by his equals. His son was bred in the service of his country, and Agatha had ranked with ladies of the highest distinction. A few months before my arrival, they had lived in a large and luxurious city called Paris, surrounded by friends, and possessed of every enjoyment which a virtue, refinement of intellect, or taste, accompanied by a moderate fortune, could afford. The father of Safi had been the cause of their ruin. He was a Turkish merchant, and had inhabited Paris for many years, when, for some reason which I could not learn, he became obnoxious to the government. He was seized and cast into prison the very day that the Safi arrived from Constantinople to join him. He was tried and condemned to death. The injustice of his sentence was very flagrant. All Paris was indignant, and it was judged that his religion and wealth, farther than the crime alleged against him, had been the cause of his condemnation. All Paris was indignant, and it was judged that his religion and wealth, rather than the crime alleged against him, had been the cause of his condemnation. I read father for some reason. That's special. Felix had accidentally been present at the trial. His horror and indignation were uncontrollable when he heard the decision of the court. He made, at that moment, a solemn vow to deliver him, and then looked around for the means. After many fruitless attempts to gain admittance to the prison, he found a strongly grated window in an unguarded part of the building, which lighted the dungeon of the unfortunate Mahometan. Man, I love new words. So much love. Who, loaded with chains, waited in despair the execution of the barbarous sentence. Muslim? Okay. Please forgive me all my transgressions against language. Where was I? Barbara said this. Felix visited the grate at night and made known to the prisoner his intentions in his favor. The Turk, amazed and delighted, endeavored to kindle the zeal of his deliverer by promises of reward and wealth. Oh, I see. It is a word for Muslim. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Hopefully I nailed it then. Felix rejected his offers with contempt. Yet when he saw the lovely Safi, who was allowed to visit her father and who, by her gestures, expressed her lively gratitude, the youth could not help owning to his own mind that the captive possessed a treasure which would fully reward his toil and hazard. The Turk quickly perceived the impression that his daughter had made on the heart of Felix, and endeavored to secure him more entirely in his interests by the promise of her hand in marriage, so soon as should he be conveyed to a place of safety. Felix was too delicate to accept this offer, yet he looked forward to the probability of the event as to the consummation of his happiness. During the ensuing days, while the preparations were going forward for the escape of the merchant, the zeal of Felix was warmed by several letters that he received from this lovely girl, who found means to express her thoughts in the language of her lover by the aid of an old man, a servant of her father, who understood French. She thanked him in the most ardent terms for his intended services towards her parent, and at the same time she gently deplored her own fate. I have copies of these letters, for I found means during my residence in the hovel to procure the implements of writing, and the letters were often in the hands of Felix or Agatha. Before I depart, I will give them to you. They will prove the truth of my tale, but at present, as the sun is already far declined, I shall only have time to repeat the substance of them to you. Safi related that her mother was a Christian Arab, seized and made a slave by the Turks. Recommended by her beauty, she had won the heart of the father of Safi, who married her. The young girl spoke in high and enthusiastic terms of her mother, who, born in freedom, spurned the bondage to which she was now reduced. She instructed her daughter in the tenets of her religion, and taught her to aspire to higher powers of intellect and an independence of spirit forbidden to the female followers of Mahomet. This lady died, but her lessons were indelibly impressed on the mind of Safi, who sickened at the prospect of again returning to Asia and being immured within the walls of a harem, allowed only to occupy herself with infantile amusements, ill-suited to the temper of her soul, now accustomed to grand ideas and a noble emulation for virtue. Emulation for virtue. For virtue, dear Lord. And I completely lost where I was, but after clearing my throat. Here. Ill-suited to the temper of her soul, now accustomed to grand ideas and a noble emulation for virtue. The prospect of marrying a Christian and remaining in a country where women were allowed to take a rank in society was enchanting to her. The day for the execution of the Turk was fixed, but on the night previous to it, he quitted his prison, and before morning was distant many leagues from Paris. Felix had procured passports in the name of his father, sister, and himself. He had previously communicated his plan to the former, who aided the deceit by quitting his house under the pretense of a journey, and concealed himself with his daughter in an obscure part of Paris. Felix conducted the fugitives through France to Lyons, and across Mont-Cenis to Leghorn, where the merchant had decided to wait for a favorable opportunity of passing into some part of the Turkish domains. Safi resolved to remain with her father until the moment of his departure, before which time the Turk renewed his promise that she should be united to his deliverer, and Felix remained with them in expectation of that event. And in the meantime, he enjoyed the society of the society of the Arabian, who exhibited towards him the simplest and tenderest affection. They conversed with one another through the means of an interpreter, and sometimes with the interpretation of looks, and Safi sang to him the divine airs of her native country. The Turk allowed this intimacy to take place, and encouraged the hopes of the youthful lovers, while in his heart he had formed far other plans. He loathed the idea that his daughter should be united to a Christian, but he feared the resentment of Felix if he should appear lukewarm, for he knew that he was still in the power of his deliverer. Still in the power of his deliverer, if he should choose to betray him to the Italian state which they inhabited. He revolved 1,000 plans by which he should be enabled to prolong the deceit until it might be no longer necessary, and secretly to take his daughter with him when he departed. His plans were facilitated by the news which arrived from Paris. The government of France were greatly enraged at the escape of their victim, and spared no pains to detect and punish his deliverer. The plot of Felix was quickly discovered, and De Lacy and Agatha were thrown into prison. The news reached Felix, and roused him from his dream of pleasure. His blind and aged father and his gentle sister lay in a noisome dungeon, while he enjoyed the free air and the society of her whom he loved. This idea was torture to him. He quickly arranged with the Turks that if the latter should find a favorable opportunity for escape before Felix could return to Italy, Safie should remain as a boarder at a convent at Leghorn, and then, quitting the lovely Arabian, he hastened to Paris and delivered himself upon the vengeance of the law, hoping to free De Lacy and Agatha by his proceeding. He did not succeed. They remained confined for 5 months before the trial took place, the result of which deprived them of their fortune, and condemned them to a perpetual exile from their native country. They found a miserable asylum in the cottage in Germany, where I discovered them. Felix soon learned that the treacherous Turk, for whom he and his family endured such unheard-of oppression, on discovering that his deliverer was thus reduced to poverty and ruin, became a traitor to good feeling and honor, and had quitted Italy with his daughter, insultingly sending Felix a pittance of money to aid him, as he said, in some plan of future maintenance. Such were the events that preyed on the heart of Felix, and rendered him, when I first saw him, the most miserable of his family. He could have endured poverty, and while this distress had been the meed of his virtue, he gloried in it. But the ingratitude of the Turk and the loss of his beloved Safie were misfortunes more bitter and irreparable. The arrival of the Arabian now infused new life into his soul. When the news reached Leghorn that Felix was deprived of his wealth and rank, the merchant commanded his daughter to think no more of her lover, but to prepare to return to her native country. The generous nature of Safie was outraged by his command. She attempted to expostulate with her father, but he left her angrily, reiterating his tyrannical mandate. A few days later, the Turk entered his daughter's apartment and told her hastily that he had reason to believe that his residence at Leghorn had been divulged, and that he should speedily be delivered up to the French government. He had, consequently, hired a vessel to convey him to Constantinople, for which city he should sail in a few hours. He intended to leave his daughter under the care of a confidential servant, to follow at her leisure with the greater part of his property, which had not yet arrived at Leghorn. When alone, Safie resolved in her own mind the plan of conduct that it would become her to pursue in his emergency. A residence in Turkey was abhorrent to her. Her religion and her feelings were alike adverse to it. By some papers of her father, which fell into her hands, she heard of the exile of her lover, and learnt the name of the spot where he then resided. She hesitated some time, but at length she formed her determination. Taking with her some jewels that belonged to her, and a sum of money, she quitted Italy with an attendant, a native of Leghorn, but who understood the common language of Turkey, and departed for Germany. She arrived in safety at a town about 20 leagues from the cottage of De Lacy, when her attendant fell dangerously ill. Safie nursed her with the most devoted affection, but the poor girl died, and the Arabian was left alone. Unacquainted with the language of the country and utterly ignorant of the customs of the world, she fell, however, into good hands. Oh, sorry. There's a period there. And utterly ignorant of the customs of the world. She fell, however, into good hands. The Italian had mentioned the name of the spot for which they were bound, and, after her death, the woman of the house in which they had lived took care that Safi should arrive in safety at the cottage of her lover. That's the end of chapter 14. I think these are going faster. Faster than the previous two streams. Reading streams, anyways. It's okay that we have, like, Valana has found a ton of extra books to read, so I might put a list of those up, maybe in one of the cards. Yeah, it might be a little faster. We'll see. We still have, like, there's still 25 chapters. We're only starting 15 here. It might be a bit of a shorter stream, but I kind of like the idea of sticking to 5 chapters per stream. I think we might do that. Yeah. Chapter 15. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers. It impressed me deeply. I learned from the views of social life which developed to admire their virtues and to deprecate the vices of mankind. As yet, I looked upon crime as a distant evil. Benevolence and generosity were ever present before me, inciting within me a desire to become an actor in the busy scene where so many admirable qualities were called forth and displayed. But in giving an account of the progress of my intellect, I must not omit a circumstance which occurred in the beginning of the month of August of the same year. One night, during my accustomed visit to the neighboring wood, where I collected my own food and brought home firing for my protectors, I found on the ground a leather portmanteau. A leather portmanteau. What's that portmanteau? Portmanteau? Maybe a bag or something. Portmanteau? It's one word. Portman and then Teo, like T-E-A-U. I'm going to look that up because I am sincerely curious. What is a portmanteau? Oops, there's no comment there. Portmanteau. No one on the internet knows. Oh, hang on. I added a Q for some reason. Probably have to be really specific. Here we go. A large traveling bag, typically made of stiff leather and opening into 2 equal parts. Oh. It's a handy haversack, kind of. A portmanteau. I see, that's how it's pronounced. You're just full of information, Valana. One of us should be. Alright, on with chapter 15. Okay, on with the chapter at the part where I left. Here we go. It contained several articles of dress and some books. I eagerly seized the prize and returned with it to my hovel. Fortunately, the books were written in the language, the elements of which I had acquired at the cottage. They consisted of Paradise Lost, a volume of Plutarch's Lives, and the Sorrows of Werther. The possession of these treasures gave me extreme delight. I now continually studied and exercised my mind upon these histories, whilst my friends were employed in their ordinary occupations. I'm amazed they haven't found him by now. The hovel he exists in clearly is not important to them at all. I can hardly describe to you the effect of these books. They produced in me an affinity of new images and feelings that sometimes raised me to ecstasy, but more frequently sunk me into the lowest dejection. In The Sorrows of Werther, besides the interest of its simple and affecting story, so many opinions are canvassed, and so many lights are thrown upon what had hitherto been to me obscure subjects, that I found it in a never-ending source of speculation and astonishment. The gentle and domestic manners it described, combined with lofty sentiments and feelings, which had for their object something out of self, accorded well with the experience among my protectors, and with the wants, all these damn commas, and with the wants which were forever alive in my own bosom. But I thought Werther himself a more divine being than I had ever beheld or imagined. His character contained no pretension, but it sunk deep. The disquisitions upon death and suicide were calculated to fill me with wonder. I did not pretend to enter into the merits of the case, yet I inclined towards the opinions of the hero, whose extinction I wept, without precisely understanding it. As I read, however, I applied much personally to my own feelings and condition. I found myself similar, yet at the same time strangely unlike, to the beings concerning whom I had read, and to whose conversation I was a listener. I sympathized with and partly understood them, but I was unformed in mind. I was dependent on none and related to none. The path of my departure was free, and there was none to lament my annihilation. My person was hideous, and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. The volume of Plutarch's Lives which I possessed contained the histories of the first founders of the ancient republics. This book had a far different effect upon me from the Sorrows of Winter. I learned from Werther's imaginations despondency and gloom, but Plutarch taught me high thoughts, had elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflections to admire and love the heroes of past ages. Many things I read surpassed my understanding and experience. I had a very confused knowledge of kingdoms, wide extents of country, mighty rivers, and boundless seas. But I was perfectly unacquainted with towns and large assemblages of men. The cottage of my protectors had been the only school in which I had studied human nature, but this book developed new and mightier scenes of action. I read of men concerned in public affairs, governing or massacring their species. I felt the greatest ardor for virtue rise within me, and abhorrence for vice, as far as I understood the significance of those terms, relative as they were, as I applied to them, to pleasure and pain alone. Induced by these feelings, I was, of course, led to admire peaceable lawgivers, Numa, Solon, and Lycurgus, in preference to Romulus and Theseus. And Theseus, that's more familiar sounding word. The patriarchal lives of my protectors caused these imprecisions to take a firm hold in my mind. Perhaps, if my first introduction to humanity had been made by a young soldier, burning for glory and slaughter, I should have been imbued with different sensations. But Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. As I read it, as I had read the other volumes which had fallen into my hands as a true history, it moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often referred the several situations, and as their similarities struck me to my own. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature. But I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Another circumstance strengthened and confirmed these feelings. Soon after my arrival in the hovel, I discovered some papers in the pocket of the dress which I had taken from your laboratory. At first, I had neglected them, but now that I was able to decipher the characters in which they were written, I began to study them with diligence. It was your journal of the 4 months that preceded my creation. You minutely described in these papers every step you took in the progress of your work. This history was mingled with accounts of domestic occurrences. You doubtless recollect these papers. They are here. Here they are. Everything is related in them which bears reference to my accursed origin. The whole detail of that series of disgusting circumstances which produced it is set in view. Circumstances which produced it is set in view. The minutest description of my odious and loathsome person is given in language which pained your own horrors and rendered mine indelible. I sickened as I read. Hateful day when I received life, I exclaimed in agony. Accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, in pity, made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. These were the reflections of my hours of despondency and solitude. But when I contemplated the virtues of the cottagers, their amiable and benevolent dispositions, I persuaded myself that when they should become acquainted with my admiration of their virtues, they would compassionate me, and overlook my personal deformity. Could they turn from their door one, however monstrous, who solicited their compassion and friendship? I resolved, at least, not to despair, but in every way to fit myself for an interview with them which would decide my fate. I postponed this attempt for some months longer, for the importance attached to its success inspired me with a dread lest I should fail. Besides, I found that my understanding improved so much with every day's experience that I was unwilling to commence this undertaking until a few more months should have added to my sagacity. I want to call it sage and city. Sagacity. He's learning. He likes that he's learning. It's like, but if I try to make friends and they don't like me, I'll stop learning. It's like when you're friends with someone that you have a crush on, and you don't want to tell them that you have a crush on them, because all of a sudden the friendship will be lost. A little different from that, perhaps, but kind of the same idea. Several changes in the meantime took place in the cottage. The presence of Safi diffused happiness among its inhabitants, and I also found that a greater degree of plenty reigned here. Felix and Agatha spent more time in amusement and conversation, and were assisted in their labors by servants. They did not appear rich, but they were contented and happy. Their feelings were serene and peaceful, while mine became every day more tumultuous. Increase of knowledge only discovered to me more clearly what a wretched outcast I was. I cherished hope, it is true, but it vanished when I beheld my person reflected in water, or my shadow in the moonshine. Even as that frail image, and that inconstant shade. don't like that. I don't like some of these sentences. I endeavored to crush these fears and to fortify myself for the trial which in a few months I resolved to undergo. And sometimes I allowed my thoughts, unchecked by reason, to ramble in the fields of paradise, and dared to fancy amiable and lovely creatures sympathizing with my feelings and cheering my gloom. Their angelic countenances breathed smiles of consolation. But it was all a dream. No Eve soothed my sorrows, nor shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's supplication to his Creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and, in the bitterness of my heart, I cursed him. Autumn passed thus. I saw with surprise and grief the leaves decay and fall, and nature again assumed the barren and bleak appearance it had worn when I first beheld the woods and the lovely moon. Yet I did not heed the bleakness of the weather. I was better fitted in my conformation for the endurance of cold than heat, but my chief delights were the sight of the flowers, the birds, and all the gay apparel of summer. When those deserted me, I turned with more attention towards the cottagers. Their happiness was not decreased by the absence of summer. They loved and sympathized with one another, and their joys, depending on each other, were not interrupted by the causalities that took place around them. The more I saw of them, the greater became my desire to claim their protection and kindness. My heart yearned to be known and loved by these amiable creatures. To see their sweet looks directed towards me with affection was the utmost limit of my ambition. I dared not think that they would turn them from me with disdain and horror. The poor that stopped at the door were never driven away. I asked, is it true? For greater treasures than a little food or rest, I required kindness and sympathy, but I did not believe myself utterly unworthy of it. The winter advanced, and an entire revolution of the seasons had taken place since I awoke into life. My attention at this time was solely directed towards my plan of introducing myself into the cottage of my protectors. I revolved many projects, but that on which I finally fixed was to enter the dwelling when the blind old man should be alone. I had sagacity. I had sagacity. I don't care. That's called sagacity now. Enough to discover that the unnatural hideousness of my person was the chief object of horror with those who had formerly beheld me. My voice, although harsh, had nothing terrible in it. I thought, therefore, that if, in the absence of his children, I could gain the goodwill and mediation of the old De Lacy, I might, by his means, be tolerated by my younger protectors. That's actually not a bad idea. It's pretty good. One day, when the sun shone on the red leaves that strewed the ground and diffused cheerfulness, although it was denied warmth, Safi, Agatha, and Felix departed on a long country walk, and the old man, at his own desire, was left alone in the cottage. When his children had departed, he took up his guitar and played several mournful but sweet airs, more sweet and mournful than I had ever heard him play before. At first his countenance was illuminated with pleasure, but as he continued, thoughtfulness and sadness succeeded. At length, laying aside the instrument, he sat absorbed in reflection. My heart beat quick. This was the hour and moment of trial which would decide my hopes or realize my fears. The servants were gone to a neighboring fair. All was silent in and around the cottage. It was an excellent opportunity. Yet, when I proceeded to execute my plan, my limbs failed me, and I sank to the ground. Again I rose, and, exerting all the firmness of which I was master, removed the planks which I had placed before my hovel to conceal my retreat. The fresh air revived me, and, with renewed determination, I approached the door of their cottage. I knocked. "Who's there?" said the old man. "Come in." I entered. "Pardon this intrusion," said I. "I am a traveler in want of a little rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." "Enter," said De Lacy, "and I will try in what manner I can to relieve your wants. But unfortunately my children are from home, and as I am blind, I am afraid I shall find it difficult to procure food for you." "Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. It is warmth and rest only that I need." I sat down, and a silence ensued. I knew that every minute was precious to me, yet I remained irresolute in what manner to commence the interview, when the old man addressed me. "By your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countrymen. Are you French?" "No, but I was educated by a French family." Technically true. "And understood that language only. I am now going to claim the protection of some friends whom I sincerely love and whose favor I have some hopes." "Are they Germans?" "No, they are French. But let us change the subject. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around, and I have no relation or friend upon earth. These amiable people to whom I go have never seen me, and know little of me. I am full of fears, for if I fail there, I am an outcast in the world forever. Do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely, therefore, on your hopes, and if these friends are good and amiable, do not despair. They are kind. They are the most excellent creatures in the world, but, unfortunately, they are prejudiced against me. I have good dispositions. My life has been hitherto harmless and in some degree beneficial, but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes, and where they ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster." "That is indeed unfortunate. But if you are really blameless, can you not undeceive them?" "I am about to undertake that task, and it is on that account that I feel so many overwhelming terrors. I tenderly love these friends I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habits of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and that is the prejudice which I wish to overcome." "Where do these friends reside?" "Near this spot." Also technically true. The old man paused and then continued. "If you will unreservedly confide to me the particulars of your tale, I perhaps may be of use in undeceiving them. I am blind and cannot judge of your countenance, but there is something in your words which persuades me that you are sincere." Yeah, old man figured it out. Well, guys, they're smart. One day I'll be like that. "I am poor and an exile, but it will afford me true pleasure to be in any way serviceable to a human creature." "Excellent man, I thank you, and accept your generous offer. You raised me from the dust by this kindness, and I trust that by your aid I shall not be driven from the society and sympathy of your fellow creatures. Heaven forbid, even if you were really criminal, for that can only drive you to desperation and not instigate you to virtue. I also am fortunate. I and my family have been condemned, although innocent. Judge therefore if I do not feel for your misfortunes. How can I thank you, my best and only benefactor? From your lips first have I heard the voice of kindness directed towards me. I shall be forever grateful. and your present humanity assures me of success with those friends whom I am on the point of meeting. May I know the names and residence of those friends? I paused. This, I thought, was the moment of decision, which was to rob me of, or bestow happiness on me forever. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength, and I sank on the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment I heard the steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seizing the hand of the old man I cried, "Now is the time. Save and protect me. You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Do not you desert me in the hour of trial." "Great God!" exclaimed the old man. "Who are you?" At that instant the cottage door was opened, and Felix, Safi, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted. Safi, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward with a supernatural force, tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung in a transport of fury. He dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sunk within me as with bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blow when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage, and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. That is the end of chapter 15. Looks like all his work and effort may be for naught. Kind of tragic. But if it wasn't, I don't know how else we would explain him being where he is now. So, yeah, it's not a bad cliffhanger. No. It has been 2 hours, which is fine. Next week, I am doing training, and this will probably be the extent of the reading I do anyways. If I still do reading, I may not. I really sort of conflicted on that. I don't want to skip a whole week, but at the same time, training for various certifications for my job often requires essentially a week of intense study and review. And, excuse me, I just hiccuped. And I probably won't be able to. In fact, I'll probably just say no streams on Monday and Wednesday. Friday is a testing day, and I should be done review and testing by the time by the time we normally start on Friday. So I'll probably keep that so we get to do our 2 game streams, which is good because I think Space Marine 2 we're playing. They have drops right now, and Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Sunday are the last 2 days that I'm playing when those drops still exist. We are probably going to flip out back to Dune, because Dune has like another 4 weeks after that of more drops. So I'm going to go back and forth. I want to focus on the games I like to play. These 2 games are included, and essentially, if one of the games I'm playing has drops, I figure what's a great opportunity just to play those games, right? People like drops, and I like people liking drops when they watch me, so it works out. I'm not sure if flipping back to the just chatting screen is efficient. It doesn't matter. Who cares? It's a damn screen. It's a damn scene. Yeah. So I've talked about the things I wanted to talk about. Next time we will pick up with chapter 16. We'll find out what happens after our monster evacuates the house where his hopes have died, apparently. We'll see how he gets to the snowy mountain peaks, which are nearby that area, right? So he sort of came to this area around Geneva, where everything's happening. Well, not everything. All of the recent stuff has happened. Where it started and where it shall end. Thank you for joining me. Those who are watching the VOD, before you finish the video, please make sure to return your reading materials to the shelves before you depart. And remember to be kind to one another.